Hello and welcome to Mr. Valentin's YouTube video for Beowulf. This video is for my 10th grade students, but if you're listening, I'm going to review all the parts of Beowulf, the importance of the epic poem and epic poetry. I'm also going to be reviewing exile poetry, which fits into the Anglo-Saxon themes. So let's begin. Just so you can familiarize yourself with what's going on the screen. Up here is the information about the Anglo-Saxons, the religious influence, and some other things I'll be talking about, so there's that. And then this is what's the main slide is about, the literary terms. In this text box up in here, this is what will appear as I write and I move the information around. So we begin. So the first thing we should know about Anglo-Saxon literature is that it's old, alright, very antique. As some of this literature is as old as, they say, the 5th century. But some of it might even be older than that. Some people report that, this is 4th century stuff, but we're going with 5th century. That's what the textbook says and indicates. Beowulf's time frame is somewhere between the 10th and 11th century. And even that, not 100% certain on that. The other important information about this is all of these poems, Beowulf, the Seafarer, the Wanderer, the Wife's Lament, are all unknown authors. So that's some information to keep in mind. The other thing you want to keep in mind is that these religious influences in the text are important. Most of the texts have a pagan ideology about them, meaning fate is the main idea for the text. But you'll begin to see, especially in Beowulf, that there is a Christian ideology emerging. Overall, the themes are still pagan, but the ideologies of Christianity start to take place. So keep that in mind. The first literary term that appears in our story is really the sound literary terms we should be focusing on. And of course, the first one is alliteration, which is the repetition of initial consonant sounds This is what makes Dr. Seuss sound so appealing. Alright, so an example would be Big Bertha, Little Bertha, Big B, Little B, what begins with B, Big Bertha's Big Balloons, B, B, B. Alright, so that B repeating initially is alliteration. We also have assonance, which is the repetition of vowel sounds. So we have, again, its assonance is the repetition of vowel sounds, usually in unrhymed words. So an example would be, he flies high. That I sound is assonance. Kennings, a two-word poetic renaming of someone or something. So we use the example in class of Batman. Instead of calling him Batman, we call him the Caped Crusader or the Dark Knight. All right. Words like of and the are generally excluded from this. You should know Susurrus, especially for the poetry, which are rhythmic breaks in the lines of poetry. These allow the readers to get some breaths in between lines. This next one, personification, is something you should be familiar with, giving lifelike qualities to non-living or non-human things. All of the poems in our selection were elegies. That is, they were all lyric poems mourning the loss of someone or something. They were all pretty Debbie Downer, alright, pretty sad. And finally, all these poems are about exile, which is removal from one's homeland by authoritative decree. If it's not by an authority, it's technically not exile. Alright, so do keep that in mind. So those are literary terms you need to know. On this slide, this is from the Seafarer. What we're going to do is we're going to read it, and we're going to identify some alliteration, some assonance, some kennings, and some imagery. So, let's read the poem first together. This tale is true and mine. It tells how the sea took me, swept me back and forth in sorrow and fear and pain, showed me suffering in 100 ships, in 1,000 ports, and in me. It tells of smashing surf when I sweated in the cold. My feet were cast in icy bands, bound with frost, with frozen chains, and hardship groaned around my heart. Hunger tore at my sea-weary soul. My soul roams with the sea, the whale's home, wandering to the widest corners of the world. So the best thing to do is to always start at the beginning, all right? And notice any sounds that come immediate. All right? This tale is true and mine. It tells. So in this first line we have an example of one of these literary terms. What literary term appears? And of course, tale, true, tells. All right? So we're hearing some alliteration. It tells how the sea took me, swept me back and forth in sorrow and fear and pain. All right? So we're getting some strong imagery here of the ocean. All right? It's the first time we notice the ocean imagery, but I'm going to hold off on that for just a second. It showed me suffering in 100 ships. There again, what do we notice? And of course the answer is alliteration. So the kind of, I guess, sad part of this poem is that it showed suffering not just in the ships, what the ships look like, but it showed them in the places that they went to and the suffering within the self. All right, so there's your exile moment, all right, that you are isolated. So, this recalls exile. It tells of smashing surf when I sweated in the cold. All right, so there again, we're seeing alliteration. My feet were cast in icy bands, bound with frost, with frozen chains, and hardship groaned. All right, so there's a lot of literary terms going on here. Of course, all right, we should notice the imagery. If you haven't caught on, this is a very cold and desolate sounding location. So some things that clue us in on that, all right, the word frozen, frost, icy, cold. So all of these things kind of make us think of the freezingness. All right, so this is a good example of imagery, right? Some other things, all right. Hardship groaned. Now, hardship groaning, can hardship groan? And of course the answer is no. All right, so here we're seeing, and it's not up on the top, but we're seeing some personification. Out of room. There we go. All right. We're also hearing for the first time, all right, some assonance. Bound with frost, frozen. All right, so in all of this O sound, all right, frozen, groaned. All right, so there's a O sound. All right, some a little more pronounced. Fro-o-zened, grow-o-owned. All right, is far more pronounced. All right, so we have some assonance going on. Continuing on. So hardship groaned around my heart. Hunger tore at my sea-weary soul. So, again, if you notice, all right, hunger tearing. We're seeing some personification. All right. My sea-weary soul. My soul roams with the sea. So again, we have soul, soul roams with the sea. All right, so we have some alliteration, but we should also be aware, again, all right, of so, o, ro, ohms. All right, so there is some minor assonance going in here. All right. The whale's home wandering to the widest corners of the world. So, again, right, whales wandering widest world. All right, so there's alliteration, but we should also be aware that they mention the whale's home. All right. And so there we have a two-word poetic renaming of someone or something. And so, of course, this is Kenning's. And, of course, there's more in this little selection. But on your exam, you're going to have to identify certain literary terms in a certain passage, and this would be a very well done passage if you do something along the lines of this. And so this brings us to Beowulf. Remember, all of the literary terms that we just went over still apply to Beowulf, but the focus now, of course, is Beowulf and noticing some of the traits of Beowulf, all right, and going over characters, etc. So, some important features of the epic. Well, first we should define epic, and you should be able to do that. It's a long narrative poem that's about an epic hero, that celebrates an epic hero. There are 4 traits to an epic poem. Right? The first is that there's an epic hero, right? A larger-than-life character. And Beowulf is a larger-than-life character. He's bigger, he does things that are extraordinary. Character must go on a quest that is a long and dangerous journey. Beowulf does this when he goes to Heorot. He also must do valorous deeds. Valorous deeds are actions that demonstrate the hero's courage, strength, or virtue. And finally, in an epic, there must be divine intervention. The hero receives help from a god or another supernatural force. So these become the major important traits of Beowulf. Know them, be able to define them, be able to define the epic itself, the long narrative poem that celebrates an epic hero. That's something that people generally do forget. Just a handful of additional literary terms that we should go over very quickly. An allusion is a reference to a literary or historical person, place, or thing. You should be aware of a simile. A simile is a comparison that uses like or as. And finally, foreshadowing. A subtle hint at future events. Alright, those are just the other additional literary terms you should know in addition to the previous ones that we've gone over. So our text opens with the chapter known as the Wrath of Grendel. A couple quick things. Alright, so one of course, the important names here is Grendel. Alright, he's the evil monster. Alright. Know why Grendel is upset. Alright. Grendel is upset because ... the music is too loud. Alright, this is something that I've been saying all along, that I almost feel bad for Grendel, like he gets a bum rap. People are like, oh, he's an evil monster. He wouldn't have been so evil if his ears weren't so sensitive and if the music wasn't being played too loud. Alright, but it was. Alright, and where is the music being played too loud? Inside the mead hall, and that's an important thing you should know, the mead hall. And the name of the mead hall is Heorot. Nope, autocorrect. Heorot is the mead hall. Remember, the mead hall is the place, the location that was considered home. This was the place people returned after adventures. They were lavish areas. Food, home, ladies, all of that was the main focus of the mead hall. The king, the great king of the Danes, is Hrothgar. Those pauses are for you to fill in the blank yourself. He's the Danish king. And Hrothgar is noticeably upset because at the nighttime, Grendel lurks around and is killing people. Which is, and I would agree, very problematic. Right? We know Grendel is more than the evil monster that I've made him out to be. He's far more. They describe him as a person who was born of Cain. And of course here we have two literary terms at work here. The fact that he is born of Cain. And so the first is that we have kennings, a two-word poetic renaming of someone or something. Instead of calling him Grendel, right, they say he is born of Cain. And it's also important because it's an allusion, right? And of course it's an allusion to the Bible. So there's your Christian influence. And this is the story of Cain and Abel. And Cain killed Abel. It's the story of the first murder. So the fact that he is born of Cain, this is, again, a terrifying kind of moment. Grendel's extremely violent. Right? It says in the text, if you have the text, this is the Prentice Hall literature. In my text, it's page 42. Around line 32, I'll read. All right, and this is Grendel entering. Then, when darkness had dropped, Grendel went up to Herod, wondering what the warriors would do in that hall when their drinking was done. He found them sprawled in their sleep, suspecting nothing, their dreams undisturbed. The monster's thoughts were as quick as his greed or his claws. He slipped through the door, and there in the silence he snatched up 30 men. He smashed them, unknowing in their beds, and ran out with them, their bodies, the blood dripping behind him, back to his lair, delighted with his night's slaughter. So Grendel is strong enough to kill 30 men like it's no big deal. And we should note that that's a pretty epic thing to be able to do. So there you go. At the end of this moment, it says, hate had triumphed. What literary term is that? Hate had triumphed. And of course, we know that's personification. So keep that in mind. So, poor Hrothgar, he doesn't know what to do. It says that Herod was abandoned, and it was abandoned for 12 years. And that's important, all right, because that means 12 years goes by and these stories of Grendel are starting to come out. Right? And every night, the text states, and this is on page 43, line 79, so mankind's enemy continued his crimes, killing as often as he could, coming alone, bloodthirsty and horrible. All right, they refer to him as mankind's enemy, which of course is Kennings. And we hear, continued his crimes, killing as often as he could. So there is alliteration. But he's still haunting Herod every single night. And the only thing he can't touch is Hrothgar's throne. And why can't he touch Hrothgar's throne? Because it is protected by God. Which is an example of what literary term? In our text, God is capitalized, so it is the God. All right, so the Christian, or at least Judeo-Christian God, is protected by God. So what literary term is this? If God is influencing the story in some way, we have divine intervention. So in the chapter The Coming of Beowulf, and in the corner here, we have our animated featured Beowulf. Alright, generic stock Beowulf, but for those who are curious, if you're a teacher and you're watching, alright, at least the first 30 minutes of the movie is pretty good. Alright, for the rest of us, continuing on. Alright, so we're introduced to Beowulf, alright, who is the, of course, epic hero. We're also introduced to Healfdene, and Healfdene is Hrothgar's father. We're also introduced to Hygelac. Nope. Thank you, autocorrect. Hygelac, right, Beowulf's uncle, and the ruler of, currently the ruler of the Geats. This is also the chapter where they mention Edgetho. Who is Beowulf's father. So, in this chapter, Beowulf hears of these adventurers and he travels down off to go see the Danes, to visit Heorot and kill said Grendel, evil monster. And he travels, and the journey is actually very easy. Right? It says they gave thanks to God for their easy crossing. But as soon as he arrives, a Danish watcher comes. This Danish watcher is depicted very accurately in the movie, and he's somewhat important, right? Because he's concerned about Beowulf. The Danish watcher says, this is page 45 in your text, "Whose soldiers are you? You've been carried in your deep-keeled ship across the sea road to this country of mine. Listen! We've stood on these cliffs longer than you know, knowing, keeping our coast free of pirates, raiders, sneaking ashore from their ships, seeking our lives and our gold. None have ever come more openly." So then he continues a little bit later, "Strangers! From wherever it was you sailed, tell it, and tell it quickly. The quicker, the better. I say for us all, speak, say exactly who you are, and from where, and why." All right, so this Danish watcher is concerned that Beowulf is a pirate. That's a pretty legitimate concern, especially in this time. And so Beowulf answers him and says, "Yes, I am going to go and destroy this villainous monster." And the Danish watcher says, "By all means, go knock yourself out." And so they go. It's very important that you know Beowulf wears a male shirt. That becomes an important kind of figure. So male is, all right, a flexible body armor made of woven rings, all right, woven metal rings. Becomes important because it saves his butt from time to time. All right. So Beowulf greets Hrothgar. He says, "Hail, Hrothgar! Hygelac is my cousin and my king," and he gives us some background information. But then what he says next is kind of the craziest part. He says, Go where my feet were afraid to. This is line 266 and following. Go where my feet were afraid to. If I hid behind some broad linen shield, my hands alone shall fight for me. Struggle for life against the monster. So Beowulf will fight Grendel with his bare hands. Which is pretty epic all on its own. It also shows that maybe Beowulf's a little full of himself, but he is an epic hero. This is the same monster who killed 30 people like it's no big deal, and Beowulf's like, yeah, I got this, no worries. So, we have to see. So the battle with Grendel begins, and it seems fairly straightforward that Beowulf is going to go in and win. And largely that is exactly what happens. The text previews this, foreshadows this when it says, but fate that night intended Grendel to gnaw the broken bones of his last human supper. So, even before the text really ever gets rolling with what's going to happen, it foreshadows Grendel's death. This is not going to work out well for him. So do keep that there's a complete acknowledgement that he will die. All right. They refer to Grendel as the shepherd of evil, the guardian of crime. So, of course, we hear some kennings. So just be aware that these are things that happen. And so they start fighting. And it gets pretty gruesome pretty quickly as Grendel takes a body, all right, and he ripped the first body apart. All right. It says, he ripped his body to bits with powerful jaws, and then he drank the blood from his veins and bolted him down, hands and feet. Death and Grendel's great teeth came together, snapping life shut. All right, so in class I gave that kind of image of like popping off the top of a bottle, all right, just kind of drinking the blood. That's what happens. All right. But then he comes across Beowulf, all right, and they start beating each other. It says there's great bodies beating at its beautiful walls. So we hear some alliteration within the text. And so what starts to happen? Beowulf clearly starts winning with his bare hands. And you might say that's impossible. And the answer is, of course that's not, because he is an epic hero. All right, he is a larger-than-life character that he is fighting with his bare hands. All right, besides, it's up to fate to make that decisions. And if fate decides he should win, then he will win. And so the text states, all right, the monster's hatred rose higher, but his power had gone. He twisted in pain, and the bleeding sinews deep in his shoulders snapped, muscles and bones split and broke. So very nice. We have this very nice accompanying picture, not gruesome whatsoever, all right, where they're snapping. All right, we can see the sinews within the shoulder, all right, ripping them off. All right, and you see there's like swords by the side because other people tried to help. All right, it's gruesome, but Beowulf's amazing because he's the epic hero. All right, and so what does he do with that arm? All right, he hangs it on the rafters. It's kind of like a trophy. So in between the last chapter and this chapter, there's another chapter called the Monsters Lair, where we find out there's an underwater lair. That's what you need to know. Right? Beowulf resolves to kill Grendel's monstrous mother, and he travels to the lake in which she lives. And so there's a battle with Grendel's mother. All right? So an important character here, of course, is Grendel's mother, and she must be pretty ferocious. Right? Why are they so mad at Grendel's mother? She's been busy killing Hrothgar's friends. Problematic. So, this is where Beowulf seems to be nervous for the first time. All right. It says that he will bring some weapons. He talks to a character known as Unferth. Now, in our abridged version, Unferth is not a character, but in the full text he is, and he is the Danish warrior who questions Beowulf. We're also introduced to Hrunting. Nope. Autocorrect. Who is Beowulf's sword. So those are some more important names that you need to know. So this is where the movie's totally terrible. Something about sexy Angelina Jolie monster trying to sort of seduce Beowulf is totally wrong. Alright, this is a she-wolf in the finest sense, Grendel's mother. She's the mighty water witch. She's awful and evil, and they fight. Alright, and they fight underwater in an underwater lair. And it doesn't go well for Beowulf. Alright, Beowulf performs poorly during the battle. Right. Nothing seems to injure this mighty water witch. But, as it is, this is an epic poem, right, and as they're fighting underwater, it really looks bad for him. But at the bottom of 53, going into page 54, it says, "Once Beowulf was back on his feet and fighting, then he saw, hanging on a wall, a heavy sword, hammered by giants, strong and blessed with their magic, the best of all weapons, but so massive that no ordinary man could lift its carved and decorated length." All right, so on the wall magically appears a sword. All right, that's hammered by giants, and this sword is, of course, an example of what literary term? And of course, we know that literary term is divine intervention. And so he uses this sword and he cuts off her head, all right, which we kind of have this image of Beowulf on the left here, over a body. And I'm not sure if that's Grendel or Grendel's mother, but he chops off her head and then subsequently follows and chops off his head. All right, so he cuts the head of both the monsters. And whenever in doubt, whenever you have questions about the text, you're like, this doesn't make sense, the answer is always because he's Beowulf. All right, that's what he does. He's this ferociously strong, and at this time doing things for the right reason. Right? These are his very important literary term, valorous deeds. All right? He's doing things for the right reasons. All right? And so he gets back and everyone thanks him. And so ends the battle with Grendel's mother. This last battle is truly the last battle. At this point in the story, it's been quite a while since Beowulf was with the Geats, or with the Danes at Harret. In fact, it's been 50 years later. Right? And now there's a dragon kind of terrorizing the kingdom. We're not 100% sure. All right, this version doesn't exactly state explicitly what's going on. But what we do know is that Beowulf is doing this for, instead of valorous deeds, instead of performing this for great reasons, he's doing this for one express purpose, and that is fame. All right, he's doing this for Some would argue the wrong reason. I would argue the wrong reason. And now we have to think, if Beowulf was like, I don't know, 18 or 20, we'll pretend he's young, but I have a feeling he might have been a little older, but we'll go with 20. If it's 50 years later, now Beowulf is a pretty old dude. So we'll use a nice little approximate sign. He's approximately 70? Question mark? All right. We're not sure, but he's old. And so he says when he goes to do this, I'd use no sword, no weapon, if this beast could be killed without it. But clearly it can't be, so he has to use all of these things. And this is no ordinary dragon. This is a red, fire-breathing dragon. All right? It's a scary thought. All right? And when Beowulf immediately starts fighting, things start to go very poorly. It starts breathing fire, it melts his sword and shield, and it's ultimately, it looks bad for him, and he's slowly dying. And at this point, it looks bleak. And his warriors look at him, and they run. They're like, no way. I am not fighting a fire-breathing dragon. And really, can you blame them? All right. But one warrior alone is like, no, 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 we got this. And so we're introduced to the character who saves the day, and his name is Wiglaf. And Wiglaf is a Swedish hero, and he will save Beowulf. Save-ish Beowulf. All right. Doesn't quite go as nice as we could imagine. We're also introduced to Wexton, who is Wiglaf's father. Important characters, they appear on the exam. Right. So after we get some background, right, Wiglaf jumps in, and he ends up slaying the dragon. Not so bad. All right, it happens pretty anticlimactic in our text. All right, I'm sure if we read the full text, it would be far more exciting. And that's the end of the last battle. Right? It's 1, 2, 3, quick. And it doesn't look so good. All right, our text states, Wiglaf and Beowulf kill the dragon, but the old king is mortally wounded. As he dies, Beowulf asks Wiglaf to bring him treasure that the dragon was guarding. So, at this point, Beowulf is mortally wounded. The last two chapters, all right, are the spoils and the farewell. I've combined them into one last one because they're both very quick chapters. So, the narrator seems a little peeved at Beowulf, right? As if Beowulf deserved his death. And I'm not here to comment on how I feel, but if you had my class, I think the narrator makes a good point. It says, the narrator says, this is page 60, line 787. He says, so gold can easily triumph and defeat the strongest of men, no matter how deep it is hidden. All right, that if you're greedy, you're gonna die. All right. We'll say you will pay the price. That's a nicer way of saying it. All right, but Beowulf does this for the wrong reason. It is not about valorous deeds. The only character who acts in valor, or with valor, is Wiglaf, and we know he's successful. So that's important. All right, Wiglaf, let me add. All right, acts with valor. Important things to know. And of course we have gold can easily defeat the strongest of men, so we have what literary term? We have personification, because gold really can't do that. All right, it's saying if you're greedy. So keep that in mind. So Wiglaf does as instructed, and he collects the gold. And Beowulf, in his dying words, he's like dying. Think action hero, last stand, has his final thing to say. All right, he should be dead, but he's going to give a speech anyway. And in his self-centered final moments, he says, "Have the brave Geats build me a tomb where the funeral flames have burned me, and build it here at the water's edge, high on this bit of land, so sailors can see this tower and remember my name and call it Beowulf's Tower." If that's not conceited, I don't know what is. All right, so they say, call it Beowulf's Tower. All right. Because Beowulf must be remembered, and he is a great hero. All right, he did, at least earlier in his life, do things for the right reason. And so, the warriors who abandoned were, quote-unquote, denounced. All right? And in the farewell, we do find out that the Great Tower is built. And the Great Tower is basically a lighthouse, right? So that people can find their way. Right? So Beowulf is the person who helps people. So, despite all the talk of fate in our text, which is a pagan theme, all right, we see at the end God being the focus, all right, and that you should give thanks to the Heavenly Father, which is Christian. All right, so we see this kind of turmoil within the text itself. And so they build the tower, and they say, no person, no man so open to his people, so deserving of praise. That Beowulf is the person who deserved the most praise. So ends the story. So that brings us to an end. All right, be sure to review the literary terms, the plot synopsis, and all that information that was given to you. All right, thanks to Abhai, whose Beowulf Creative Project, .weebly.com, aided in the pictures for this very nice video. All right, be sure to like, subscribe, leave comments, etc. All right, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. And that's that. Thanks for listening.